If you retired today with $1 million in the bank and followed the most popular retirement advice on the planet, there's a very real chance you'd be broke eating canned beans and arguing with your cat about whose turn it is to pay rent before you even turn 85. The 4% rule. It's the golden child of retirement planning. Reddit threads worship it. Your Uncle Gary at Thanksgiving won't shut up about it. But here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. The 4% rule is cracking. And for a growing number of retirees, it's not just cracking, it's failing in ways people didn't expect. Today, we're going to break down exactly why this foolproof retirement strategy can leave some people high and dry, what the actual data says right now, and what you should be doing instead so you don't end up greeting people at Walmart at 79 because your nest egg decided to ghost you. Let's get into it. All right, so before I roast this rule into oblivion, let me give credit where credit is due. The 4% rule isn't some random numbers someone pulled out of thin air at a cocktail party. It actually comes from a guy named William Bengen, a financial advisor who in 1994 ran a ton of historical simulations to figure out the safest amount a retiree could withdraw annually from a balanced portfolio without running out of money over 30 years. His conclusion? 4%. Well, technically 4.15%, but we rounded down because, America loves a clean number. And for a while, it worked. It worked great, actually, because the economic conditions of the late 1900s were ridiculously favorable. Stocks were booming, bond yields were strong, inflation was relatively tame. It was like trying to fail at a game that was rigged in your favor. But here's the issue. We don't live in the 1990s anymore, despite what your wardrobe might suggest. The 4% rule was built on the back of historical data stretching from 1926 to the early 90s. And yes, during that window, it held up beautifully. But let me ask you something. Would you use a GPS from 1994 to drive across the country today? No, you'd end up in a cornfield in Nebraska asking a scarecrow for directions. The economic landscape has fundamentally shifted, and the 4% rule hasn't kept up. Let's talk about why. First up, inflation. Not the cute, manageable 2% kind. I'm talking about the kind that makes a dozen eggs cost more than a concert ticket. We just went through a period of sustained, elevated inflation that chewed through purchasing power like a golden retriever through a couch cushion. When you're adjusting your withdrawals upward every year to keep pace with rising prices, you're pulling out bigger and bigger chunks from a portfolio that may not be growing fast enough to replace what you're taking. Let me put this in perspective. A retiree who started withdrawing $40,000 in their first year and adjusted annually at 3.5% inflation would be pulling out roughly $56,000 by year 10. Sounds fine, right? Except that $56,000 only buys what $40,000 bought a decade ago. Your lifestyle is frozen in time while your withdrawals keep climbing. It's like running on a treadmill. You're moving, but you're going absolutely nowhere. Second, bond yields. The 4% rule assumed a balanced portfolio with roughly half in stocks and half in bonds. And back in the day, bonds were pulling their weight. You could park your money in a 10-year treasury and collect 6 to 7% without breaking a sweat. Today, though, bond yields have improved from the rock bottom era, sure, but they're nowhere near the historical averages the rule was built on. Your safe half isn't generating the same cushion it used to. And third, we're living way too long. I mean that in the nicest way possible. When Bengen designed this rule, the average American man was expected to live about 15 years past age 65. Women, about 19. A 30-year buffer seemed like overkill. Fast forward to today, and people are routinely living into their late 80s and 90s. Medical advances are keeping us alive longer, which is amazing, unless your money dies before you do. For a 50-year retirement horizon, the 4% rule's historical success rate drops to around 80%. That means 1 in 5 people following this strategy for a longer retirement would run out of money. Those are not odds I'd bet my golden years on. Okay, now let's talk about the boogeyman of retirement planning, sequence of returns risk. This is the thing that can take a perfectly good retirement plan and absolutely demolish it, and most people have never even heard of it. Here's how it works. The 4% rule assumes your portfolio earns an average return over time, but averages are liars. I cannot stress this enough. Averages are beautiful, seductive liars. Let's say the stock market averages 8% per year over 30 years. Sounds great. But what if in your first 3 years of retirement, the market drops 20%, then 15%, then 10%? Even if it recovers and averages out to 8% over the full 30 years, it doesn't matter. because you were pulling money out during the crash. You were selling shares at the worst possible time. You were withdrawing from a shrinking pool, and that pool never fully recovers. It's like trying to fill a bathtub while someone is drilling holes in the bottom. The water eventually runs out no matter how hard you crank the faucet. Morningstar's research found that retirees who experienced poor returns in the first 5 years of retirement and didn't adjust the spending were significantly more likely to deplete their savings entirely. Not slightly more likely, significantly. As in, maybe I should look into that Walmart greeter position levels of more likely. The 4% rule doesn't adapt for this. It tells you to keep withdrawing, keep adjusting for inflation, and trust the averages. But when you're pulling money out of a declining portfolio, the averages aren't coming to save you. They're sending thoughts and prayers. So, what are the smart people saying? Let's look at the data. Morningstar puts out an annual State of Retirement Income report, and their latest research pegs the safe starting withdrawal rate for 2026 at 3.8%, not 4%. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, come on, that's only a 0.1% difference. Who cares? Well, let me show you who cares. If you retire with $500,000, the difference between 3.9% and 4% is only about $500 a year. Not a big deal. But if you retire with $2.5 million, that gap becomes $2,500 per year. And remember, every subsequent withdrawal is based on that initial number. Over 30 years, that tiny 0.1% difference compounds into tens of thousands of dollars. And here's what makes this even spicier. Even Bengen, the guy who created the rule, has said that under certain portfolios, you could have withdrawn closer to 4.5 to 4.7% historically. But here's the catch. That only works under very specific conditions, not for the average retiree. So even the creator of the rule is out here saying, hey, maybe don't follow my rule exactly. That's like the inventor of the Segway telling you to just walk. The real issue is this. The 4% rule was designed for the absolute worst-case historical scenario. If you follow it rigidly during a period of good returns, you could die with a mountain of unspent money. And if you follow it during an exceptionally bad sequence of returns, you could run out. It's a blunt instrument being used for a precision job. Here's where it all comes together. Financial researchers are now talking about what I like to call the Bermuda Triangle of retirement. 3 forces converging at the same time that can sink your retirement plan without warning. 1. Sustained inflation that erodes purchasing power while forcing bigger withdrawals. 2. Sequence of returns risk that punishes you for retiring at the wrong time. 3. Increased longevity that means your money needs to last 35, 40, even 50 years instead of the 30 the rule was designed for. When all 3 of these hit simultaneously, and in the current economic environment they very much can, the 4% rule goes from safe and simple to financial time bomb. The Northwestern Mutual 2026 Planning in Progress study found that Americans now believe they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably. That's 15% higher than what people said just 1 year earlier. People can feel it in their bones. The old numbers don't work anymore. And yet, the 4% rule is still the default advice floating around the internet. It's still the first thing that comes up when you Google, how much can I withdraw in retirement? Now here's something that really grinds my gears. The 4% rule tends to operate in this beautiful fantasy world where your expenses are smooth, predictable, and rise only with inflation, like some perfectly behaved line on a spreadsheet. Meanwhile, in the real world, retirement expenses are about as predictable as a toddler with a Sharpie. Let's start with the big one. Healthcare. This is the elephant in the retirement room, and the 4% rule doesn't even acknowledge it's there. Healthcare costs tend to rise faster than general inflation and can become one of the biggest expenses later in retirement. The 4% rule treats every year of retirement like it costs the same amount plus a little inflation bump. But retirement spending doesn't work that way. Researchers have actually identified a pattern called the retirement spending smile. In early retirement, you spend more. You're traveling, eating out, buying that boat you always wanted. In middle retirement, spending dips because you slow down. And then in late retirement, spending rockets back up because of healthcare, medications, and potential long-term care needs. The 4% rule draws a straight line through what is very clearly a curve. And then there's taxes. The 4% rule conveniently forgets that Uncle Sam is sitting at your retirement dinner table with his hand out. If the bulk of your savings is in a traditional 401k or IRA, every single dollar you withdraw is taxed as ordinary income, so your $40,000 isn't really $40,000 of spending money. Depending on your bracket, state taxes, and whether your Social Security benefits are getting taxed, which, surprise, they probably are, you might only see $30,000 to $34,000 of that actually hit your checking account. So now your safe 4% withdrawal is functionally closer to a 3% withdrawal in real spending power. And nobody told you that. The 4% rule certainly didn't. It just smiled and said, "Trust me, bro." Let's also not forget required minimum distributions. Once you hit a certain age, the IRS forces you to start pulling money out of your tax-deferred accounts whether you want to or not, and those RMDs can put you into a higher tax bracket, increase the taxes on your Social Security benefits, and jack up your Medicare premiums through IRMA surcharges. It's a cascading tax event that the 4% rule has absolutely zero framework to handle.
The bottom line is this: the 4% rule gives you a gross number in a net world. It tells you what to pull from your accounts, but says nothing about what you actually get to keep or what your real expenses look like. And building a 30-year plan on a number that ignores taxes, healthcare, and the actual shape of retirement spending is like building a house without accounting for the roof. Everything looks fine until it rains. Okay, I've spent the last 12 minutes giving a proper reality check, and now you're wondering, so what's the solution? The answer isn't to throw the 4% rule in the trash entirely. It's a decent starting point, but you need to add flexibility, guardrails, and a willingness to adapt. Here are the strategies that actually work. Strategy 1, the guardrails approach. This is my personal favorite. You set an initial withdrawal rate, say 5%, but you establish upper and lower guardrails. If your withdrawal rate rises above 6% because your portfolio tanked, you cut your spending by 10%. If it falls below 4% because the market soared, you give yourself a raise. You're creating a dynamic system that responds to reality instead of ignoring it. Research shows this approach outperforms the rigid 4% rule by 15 to 20% in terms of total lifetime spending. Strategy 2, the percentage of portfolio method. Instead of withdrawing a fixed dollar amount adjusted for inflation, you withdraw a percentage of your current portfolio value each year. Good year, you spend more. Bad year, you tighten up. It's not as smooth or predictable, but it mathematically guarantees you can never run out of money. You know what else isn't smooth? Being broke at 82. Pick your difficulty. Strategy 3, the bucket strategy. Divide your portfolio into 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is cash and short-term bonds, enough to cover 2 to 3 years of expenses. Bucket 2 is intermediate bonds, covering years 3 to 7. Bucket 3 is stocks, for long-term growth that you won't touch for at least 7 years. When the market crashes, you live off Bucket 1 while your stocks have time to recover. It's like having a financial airbag system. Strategy 4, build a floor with guaranteed income. Social Security, pensions, annuities, these create a baseline income that covers your essential needs regardless of what the market does. Morningstar's research found that the more of your essential expenses you cover with guaranteed income, the more aggressively you can spend from your investment portfolio. If Social Security covers your rent, food, and utilities, then your portfolio becomes your fun money. Travel, hobbies, spoiling the grandkids. The key theme across all of these, flexibility. The rigid set-it-and-forget-it mentality of the 4% rule is its greatest weakness. Retirement isn't a spreadsheet, it's a 30-year adventure with plot twists, market crashes, medical surprises, and the occasional impulse purchase of a vintage convertible. Your retirement strategy needs to roll with the punches. The 4% rule isn't dead, but it is on life support. And if you're planning to retire, or if you're already retired, you owe it to yourself to build a plan that's smarter, more flexible, and actually designed for the world we live in today. If this video helped you rethink your retirement strategy, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me, what's your current withdrawal strategy? Are you sticking with 4%? Going lower? Higher? I want to hear from you. And as always, stay smart with your money, because nobody else is going to do it for you. I'll see you in the next one.